Hey, one more thing before you go. Do you want to learn how to cleanse your consciousness to transcend the ego and ascend it spiritually? Do you want to know the secrets to how you can achieve your life's purpose? How about the key to completely transforming your life? Stay tuned. We're going to have a conversation with a man that took the higher road. He transformed his life for a higher purpose, and we'll show you how you can also. I'm your host, Michael Herst, and this is The Thing About Finding the Higher Road to Transformation. My guest in this episode is D. Neil Elliott. He's a highly educated man who owned a profitable consulting firm. He had a successful career, an amazing wife and family, but things were not all they seemed to be. Neil was facing a lot of challenges in his life, and he was in a very dark place. And by accident, he discovered a higher road. As he traveled that road, he found the key to transforming his life and got an inner state of peace, love, joy, and abundance. He had a different perspective on life, and it changed entirely. He found his mission in life was to share the knowledge he gained and the processes he used in his journey to self-awareness. Together with the blueprint he discovered that was instrumental in transforming his life, today we're going to discuss and have a conversation about how you too can take the same journey to discover and transform your life. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So am I. Like I said, in the intro, what an amazing journey. You have come a long way, but to where you were and where you are at now. I know that we're going to talk about your book and kind of how you got there, but let's start at the beginning. Where'd you grow up?
Born in Vancouver, British Columbia, and just lived south of Vancouver. Kind of lived in Canada my entire life, across Canada, and born in 1960. So currently 61 years old.
So we're pretty close. Well, we're about we'd be a year separated, so we're about the same age.
Yeah. So well, that's a good age.
It's a good age. Yeah, it's better than the alternative, right?
Well, I don't know. The alternative sounds pretty good too. We'll talk about that.
That's funny. Do you have any brothers, sisters?
So youngest of six. My father died when I was 5 years old in 1965, and consequently, my mom, she had a university degree, but was a stay-at-home mom looking after kids, of course. And she had to, my dad died in July 4th, 1965, and she had to go get a job. And so she took on getting a teaching certificate and started to work in September 1965.
So your father dying, that's an very early age to lose your father, but that was difficult for you and your family.
Well, I think it was very difficult for the family. For me, I was so young. I mean, obviously, I missed them, but a 5-year-old, they're kind of sad for a little while, and then they kind of get carrying on with whatever 5-year-olds get carried on with.
Yeah,
you kind of just roll with it.
roll. Yeah, I can imagine that would just kind of roll that way. I lost my father when I was 17 years old, so it was a little more impactful at that time.
I almost think that would be tougher because you've had a relationship, and what you're missing. I didn't really realize what I missed until I got older and recognized, well, I still don't know what I missed, but I know I didn't have that influence, my fatherly influence that other people had.
From that perspective, did you go to university?
Yeah, I have an engineering degree and I have a postgraduate degree, a master's of business administration as well.
So had you ever thought in your life that you would be an author?
No, never really contemplated that. I mean, at one point in my life, I thought I'd like to write a mystery book, but there's a certain discipline required, and that's not where my energy went. So no, I didn't really think, even though you kind of dream about it, never really thought I would be.
Now, I know you are currently married.
Currently married. First wife and I were together about 13 years, and I had two children, a boy and a girl. And then we divorced, and I met the love of my life, and we're still together. And she had an older son, so together we have three kids. And my daughter married a Texan, and she has five kids. So I have five grandkids, and they all live south of Houston.
Very well done. We'll say well done. It's a blended family, and sometimes when your second love of the first love of your life, actually, the actual love of your life comes into play, um, life gets pretty good, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, you have that contrast. So, yeah, no, it was pretty amazing. Uh, I mean, the divorce wasn't exactly a piece of cake, but I think it was better for both of us.
Well, I know that you had some obstacles that kind of started showing up in your life that kind of started you down a kind of a negative path. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but uh, you know, when we're young, so I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of consciousness and stuff like that. So, when you're young, you come into this life, and your brain doesn't really develop until age 5, where it starts to be able to make its own choices around things. Up until that time, when you're a baby, you're just this sponge absorbing the energy, the emotions, the language, your culture you've born in, and all the rest of the stuff that you are exposed to, and that starts to shape how you think and feel, and the choices you make. It starts to influence your thinking. And so I developed I said a belief system, if you will, and certain decisions and stuff that just shaped how I thought about life. Now I'm fairly logical and rational, and I have an engineering degree, so uh, reasonably good at math, so to speak, and so kind of headed down that path. But what happens is we develop these patterns of thinking and behavior, and then at age 5 we start to make our own choices and things, and they may be different than our parents and stuff like that. But essentially what we're doing is we're developing this pattern, we're programming our subconscious mind. And so we all do this, and I did it. And just over a protracted period of time, from 2002 to 2015, I drove myself into deep depression, a despondent depression that drove me to sitting down and crafting a suicide note. And that's based on just my patterns of thinking and feeling, and what I was drawing or attracting into my life. And we'll talk more about that, but kind of that's essentially what happened. And yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting when somebody gets to that point in their life that they feel that the only outlet is suicide, taking that extra step to kind of end it from that perspective. What stopped you?
Well, okay, so I'll back up again and talk a little bit about this. But in the 90s, I thought, so I in corporate world, so professional engineer, and in the corporate world, and worked in the hydroelectric industry for over 30 years in all the various aspects of hydroelectric. And I started out as an engineer, and then moved into project management. So a few $100,000 to $100 million in terms of project sizes. And um, in the 90s, I thought I would like to kind of shift how I thought and be more open to different ideas and things like that. So I picked up some spiritual books and read them, Tony Robbins, Dr. Wayne Dyer, Carolyn Myss, Napoleon Hill. You're probably familiar with all of those books. And and tried to change how I think. Positive thinking came into effect in the 90s, and kind of did that. And I worked 10 years on that, and fundamentally I could never really change how I thought. There was things that were right, and there's things that are wrong, there's things good, things bad, and those are things that we shape and reinforce as we get older in terms of our patterns of thinking. And then in 2002, I went into consulting, and that all becomes about work, pleasing the client. You don't get repeat work if you don't do a good job and deliver. And so life became about work. And so slowly this depression kind of crept on. And in 2015, I recognized I was in this place of asking myself, what's the point about life? I'm working hard. I'm making a lot of money. I'm spending a lot of money, but there just seemed to be no point. My wife and I'd have these fantastic vacations, go to Europe, and it was a lot of fun, and we had a lot of good times there. But inside, I was a mess. And we're all actors in our environment. We have this facade we can put forward to clients, families, and friends, anything that we want to project. And so no one really knew I was in this mental state of this deeply depressed state I was in. And so I started to pick up in 2015 some more newly issued spiritual books to try and again change how I thought. Followed all the processes, all great authors, all great information and stuff, but I couldn't fundamentally change how I was thinking. So I made the decision I would commit suicide. Like I just wanted to end it. And this, I was reading these books, and then this information showed up to me about a week before I sat down to craft this suicide note. And it promised to liberate me from my thinking. And so I was sitting down at a kitchen table. Our house had sold after being on the market for 7 years. I wanted to make sure my wife would be financially okay, and I could say goodbye to my kids and my family, before I pulled the trigger. So being an engineer, I'm planning it out. And so I thought, well, about 3 months out, I will do that and get all the things done, get rid of a bunch of stuff I have that I don't need and don't need to burden people with after I'm gone. So I sat down at the kitchen table and I started crafting this note. My wife had got on a plane after her house sold and went to Toronto, Ontario, Canada to visit relatives. And so I sat down at this table and crafted this note. But at the same time, this other blueprint document, I call it, showed up in my life. And I thought, well, what I'll do is it promises to liberate me from my thinking. So I'll read this document and see if it makes a difference. And if it does, great. And if it doesn't, then fine, I'll pull the trigger. And so I started on that process and reading that document, absorbing it. And it was very logical and very rational and scientific based, and bridged this gap between spirituality and science. And a year later, I was kind of like, my depression was totally gone. I was full of love and peace and joy, and I had this new verve for life, a new outlook in life, and things I saw differently, even though maybe nothing changed physically around me. I just viewed things differently. And I wanted to share this information from the rooftops, and I thought, I'm going to be looked at like a nutcase. So it took me a couple of years to figure out the best way to do that would be to write a book. And so that's what I did is I wrote a book, and my goal is to share the exact process that I went through, as well as offer for people after they've read A Higher Road from cover to cover and decide for themselves whether this process makes sense to them. If it does and they want to embark on this journey, then when they go back and either start with some of the science material or directly with step one, then when they're ready, I will share all of this information I gathered for free with them. I've put it into a PDF document that I share, so that when they're going through the process, they can follow the same process I went to. And my goal, of course, is to help people individually. The more people that have this kind of spiritual transformation, the sooner we will bring the world into this new era of love and peace. And that's what I want to do. I want to help people do this. I want to help them bring love and peace into their own um, experience in their own life, and with that, they will become a beacon of light for others to be curious about, and maybe they can invite people to do the same thing.
Well, that's an amazing opportunity for somebody to kind of look at things from that perspective. I find it very interesting that you combine the scientific with the spiritual side of it, because typically, and I've had over 100 conversations in regard to spirituality in different areas. This is the first time that I've really talked about the connection between science and spiritual, because that's kind of unusual, isn't it, in today's society?
Yeah, well, so for me, being an engineer, I like things that are logical, rational, that can be
Right.
observed, measured, and calculated. And so, even though, a bunch of other authors share a bunch of things which might work for some people, they didn't, even though I could believe it, there wasn't a process in place that in my mind made sense from a scientific perspective. And so, I look back now and go, all of these books I was reading in 2015 were actually laying this foundation for me to open me up and open up my mind to a new concept of consciousness. And it's like, if you were a farmer, this is like going into a new piece of land and getting rid of I'll call it, getting rid of the stones of despair and breaking up the clods of non-comprehensions to create this fine tilled textured soil that you can plant new seeds in. And then you can tend those seeds in water and watch them blossom into, kind of a new experience and a new concept of life, so to speak, for yourself. And I tell you, when you go through this process, and if you follow it and you're diligent, you will be able to totally transform how you think about everything in existence. And more importantly, or just as importantly, you're filled with just this inner peace and love and joy, and you just want to share that with everybody.
They say that there's only a certain number of individuals that have actually attained that level, like the gurus, the Buddhist monks, and the Dalai Lamas and things like that have theoretically, the only ones that can attain or have attained that level of awareness, and I find that very unique, number one, and very intriguing, number two, because I think that we all, we, let me ask you this: were you religious before all this took place in any form?
No, I was, I grew up agnostic. My mother, I would say, if I recall correctly, she's long gone now, but she was more of an atheist than agnostic. But I remember as a child lying in the school playground and, looking at the grass and the flowers and the trees and all the bugs and the clouds in the sky and everything and thinking, this is pretty amazing. Like, there's got to be something behind all of this creation. That's the kind of my memory of that. But no, I was agnostic and open to learning and experiencing, but no, not religious at all.
Can you help our listeners understand what agnostic means?
Well, I think the best thing, not atheist is in no, there's not a God. Maybe believing that, this is now my language. I'd never thought about describing this before. Believing that there is a God or a creator, but not actually being tied to any religion and not having any preconceived notion or teachings around, what that form of creation is, but being open to it.
Open to it. Yeah. Thank you for helping us understand that. The I grew up Catholic. I'm not a practicing Catholic. I'm more spiritual than I am anything else. I've evolved over a number of years in regard to that. So, to me, the looking at it from your perspective and looking at it from the way that you've that you've started to accomplish. I've read part of your book. I haven't read all of it, to be honest, yet. But I didn't have time in between interviews. Um, but the perspective is a brilliant approach to understanding peace, joy, inner peace, actually, in joy and happiness. I think that we all strive to reach for. Everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants to be a part of the universe collectively. I think we're all human beings. We all have that desire and that need for something else out there that would allow us to enjoy life and to be happy and to be joyful. The blueprint that you got in the first place, was that given to you, or did that just, how did that come to you?
Interesting story there. I'd like to just pause for a second, do an eye drop,
Sure.
if you don't mind. So that document it was interesting is I was reading these scientific books and some spiritual books that I share in A Higher Road for people to consider reading. And I was doing a search, and I can't remember exactly what I was doing a search for, but I was trying to find, I think it was the I Am discourses. I can't remember. And I just happened to come across this information. And if I had been in any other place other than this really deeply depressed state, I would have run from this information. It wouldn't have been something I would have even considered looking at. But because I was in this state, so deeply depressed and searching for anything that could help me, I was open to taking a look at it. And so that's kind of how it came to me. It was just this fortuitous search that kind of just fell in my lap, so to speak.
Yeah. Before you had hit that point in your lifetime, I think your bio has said that you had something 3 decades worth of seeking and looking and trying to find something more to bring you that peace and that happiness and that the joy back into your life. Um, how far into that 3 decades did you finally get the enlightening? Basically, were you enlightened with what the answers really were?
Oh, that didn't happen until I was started on this journey. So I was, 58 by the time, I digested this stuff and finally got to understand really, you know, why creation came about, how it came about, how we use the laws of the universe, the mechanisms, tools of creation in our own lives to create every event and every experience that comes into our life. We do that through our thinking and our feeling. And we can talk about that.
Yeah, is that the power of manifestation? I mean, people talk about the power of manifestation. Is that the power of manifestation, or is that just the universe collectively?
So, people talk about the power of manifestation, and typically they're talking about trying to draw positive things or things that we want into our life. But that law is really the law of cause and effect, and that law draws everything into our life. Every good experience, or everything we consider to be good, everything we consider to be bad, everything we consider to be happy and what we want, and everything we consider to be negative. And that's, this is the fundamental key, is that when you actually understand consciousness in an entirely different way, and perhaps than what you already understand. So probably the best thing to do is describe for everybody what my process was, how I shifted what I thought. And that might be the more enriching kind of discussion.
Well,
does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Can we talk about that a little bit and see what your process is, so we all have a better understanding? I think, your approach to this is, I mean, you can see you visually. For those that listen to the regular podcast and not on YouTube, you need to watch this episode because you can see it in your face. I'm used to reading people, and you can see the relax in your face. You don't have the lines and the crow's feet where from the stress and the anger and the worry, and you look relaxed, you look happy.
And that doesn't mean I don't experience those things you're talking about, but especially when I'm having this conversation with people that are open and curious, I am very relaxed because the spiritual energy flows into me, and it inspires me in terms of what to say. That doesn't mean I always interpret it right, but it does inspire me in terms of what to say. So let's first talk about, I didn't talk about the structure of my book yet, did I?
Not yet. We can
Okay, so let me talk about the structure of the book, and then that'll go directly into this scientific stuff. So there's 5 parts to my book. My recommended way to read A Higher Road is read it cover to cover, understand the process in its entirety, and then make a decision for yourself. If it makes sense for you and it's logical and fits with what you want to do, then you go back and you either start with some of the science material that I share and recommend, or start directly with step 1 and then follow the steps through logically, and take your time with it. And at that point, when you're going to embark on that, I'll provide all of that blueprint information to you. And there's a way you'll find out how to do that when you read the book. The other thing is that if it doesn't ring true to you, what I ask you to do, if you've bought a hard copy of the book, like a paperback or a hard copy, is to please just pass that book on to somebody else. We can never accurately judge the inner reality of another person. Someone that comes across very affable and kind and considerate might actually be a mess inside. We just don't know. And so you never know. If you can pass that book on without colorful commentary and let them discover for themselves, you may have done one of the biggest favors you will ever do in your life in terms of being able to impact them in a way which will totally transform their life. So please just pass it on if it didn't make sense to you.
Hey, just a real quick reminder. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for being a part of the One More Thing Before You Go family. Please remember to subscribe and or follow us. We would greatly appreciate it. We do have an app that's available for you for free. You'll find it in the App Store or on Google Play. It is compliments of Superpass, our sponsor. Anything that you want to do with your business to take it to the next level, have an entertainment or an information hub in the palm of your hand, it's Superpass. It will give you the unique opportunity for everything. One more thing before you go. Please take the time to support us by subscribing, following, and visiting our unique merchandise store at beforeyougopodcast.shop. You'll find that link to the store in our website. It is beforeyougopodcast.shop. You can find our website at beforeyougopodcast.com and one more thing before you go.com. You will find links to your favorite platform to listen to the show, as well as the show notes for today's episode and contact information for our guest. And we appreciate you. Thank you for supporting and listening to us each and every week.
So the structure of the book is this. Part 1 is an overview of the book. Part 2 is a memoir, my memoir of my life. And although I'm a private person, I did that in a very candid way so people can understand. And I use specific illustrations of how the thinking and feeling that I adopted, how I adopted that, how I reinforced that, and then how that got me to drive myself to this deep, dark, depressed state. And I do that so that people, if this makes sense to them, they can go back, look at their own life perhaps, and use it as a template to kind of sort through the kinds of thinking and feeling that they have adopted that brought these events and experiences into their life, whatever those may be. And the third part of my book is this chapter on consciousness and on science. And that chapter is designed to give people a new perspective of what consciousness is. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's designed to open up your mind to be able to, when you go to part 4 of my book, have your mind open to a place where you will be willing to accept and read the information that I share in this blueprint document. And you need to you come to that like a little child, full of wonder, full of curiosity, and without prejudgment. And if you can do that, and if you can read this material and understand it and digest it, and do not doubt creates consciousness barriers that will block learning of new information and will eradicate learning that you've already gained, this new knowledge that you've already gained. So you need to be able to, if you read something that you're kind of questioning, you need to kind of keep that in abeyance. Use positive affirmations. Just don't dwell on it. Bottom line, don't dwell on it. And just follow the process. And the last part 5 of my book, is really my personal experience as I navigated and went through these 7 steps. So that's the structure of the book. So when we talk about science and we get into this science chapter, this is really, I'll talk about how my understanding of consciousness evolved. So I used to think that consciousness was all in my brain, and everything that I thought was something I'd been exposed to or learned over the course of my life, or experienced. And the first shift I had was to realize that consciousness was not only in my brain, but in my entire body and all around me. And I came to this understanding that, what we think is really not just in our brains, but it's like this stream that goes by our awareness. Excuse me for 1 minute. It's this stream that goes by our awareness. And we will pick a thought out of that. We do this in a nanosecond. We'll pick a thought out of that stream. We'll look at it. We decide whether we like it, whether it's consistent with our thinking, being it a happy and joyful thought, or angry and a hateful thought. But if it's consistent with our thinking, then we take it and we keep it. If it's not consistent with our thinking, if we don't necessarily agree with it, we might just throw it back into that stream. And so these thoughts are going by us all the time. And we choose, we look, we throw back, we choose, we keep. And so the first thing I did was realize that, consciousness is beyond just my brain. Then I read an author, all of this is shared in this chapter. I read an author that really discussed mind and memes. And one of the big things that came out of that conversation, or that author's book, is that everything that I believe to be right or wrong, true or false, good or bad, is really just a belief. We choose those beliefs when we're younger, and we reinforce them that, yeah, that's right, that's wrong, that's good, that's bad, that's true, that's false. But really, they are just beliefs. And so that was a fundamental shift for me to understand that, and kind of start to open me up to accept other material that I was going to read. So then I read a book on epigenetics, which is all based in science and all documented in science. And what it shared was that our thinking and our feeling affects the expression of a cell. The expression of a cell is the work that it does. And so we can either promote the health and well-being of a cell, or we can be detrimental to it through what we think and what we feel. The next set of books I read, and again, I share a couple of these in A Higher Road, was a book on neuroplasticity. So before the 1960s, science used to believe that your brain grew to a certain size and then it atrophied over time as you got older. And they discovered in the 1960s that you could actually change your neural pathways, how you think, how information is transmitted through the brain, but you can also grow new brain cells. And there was one really easy read book, very pleasant read book, so to speak, that was by a medical professional that talked about and used as examples people that, as an example, had a brain injury that had negative effects from that brain injury, and how through a process that they followed, they changed how they thought and they grew new brain cells. So that's neuroplasticity. And then I read a book about a near-death experience. This was a book by a woman who was in her 40s. She had suffered from aggressive form of cancer for a 4-year period. And her body was riddled from her waist to her head and full of tumors. And her body weight went from a normal body weight to 75 pounds, and she couldn't lift her head, and she required 24-hour care, and she was on oxygen all the time. She fell into a coma. They rushed her to the hospital, and the admitting physicians told her husband and her family she wouldn't make it through the night. She woke up 24 hours later, declared she would be okay. And within 2 weeks, they couldn't find a trace of cancer in her body. She had this spontaneous remission, so to speak. All of that medically documented in the hospital. She brought back certain messages, and her book is around what she experienced in that coma for 24 hours. And she brought back certain messages, which again just expanded my concept of consciousness and awareness. And yeah, no worries. And that was really, I look in retrospect now, that was really just laying this foundation for me to be open to this blueprint material that I received.
Yeah, that book's an amazing book. I know which book you're talking about off the top of my head. I cannot remember the name of it, but through the NDE circles that I kind of follow within Facebook groups and some other ones, it's like almost like a Bible. It's she's what her experiences within that kind of open things in a whole new way for you. Now, what you just described is like I think kind of what you talk about with scientific discoveries and spiritual concepts and how they work together to help us understand our existence, kind of more in a factual way, and it still allows it to be kind of engaging. So I see the connection that you have right there, because we are scientifically based. We all, like you said, we have cells, we have brains, we have blood vessels, we have hearts, we have everything else, but it allows for the opportunity for the outside of that, from a spiritual perspective, to exist and work together. That's fascinating, actually. That's a brilliant way of explaining that.
Yeah. So, should I talk a little bit about this blueprint document, just so it gives people a taste of?
Yeah, if you will, please, I would appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. So, then in the NDE, this woman brought back specific messages that I'm going to link here. So, one of them is that we come from love and we return to love. She felt in her NDE state, in her coma state, that she was expanding to become a part of everything in the universe. So she described it as consciousness is in everything: tree, rock, another person. She also brought back a message that said, we are not judged. No matter what we do here, we're not judged after death. So at the time when I read that book, what that did is that gave me permission to commit suicide, because I had this little excuse me, had this little nagging doubt that if I committed suicide, I'd go to hell. Anyway, so
Catholic journeys, you're in purgatory.
Yes.
You don't go to hell, you don't go to heaven, you just kind of wander around.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Not a place that I necessarily wanted to be.
Me either.
So, that message to me, I didn't really understand it, but it was believable given her experience. And so then I got this blueprint document and I started this process. And what this blueprint document does is it leverages what we know in science and then teaches you some new knowledge, new information that will provide new knowledge to you, so that you can actually understand where we come from and why we're here. And then it gives you the entire process in terms of how to actually then start to make your connection back with the divine. So I'll call it the divine at the moment. You can call it God. You can call it our source, our creator, Yahweh, Tao, Allah, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. There's only one creator. And so I'll call it the divine in this conversation. And so, for example, what do we know today in science that we didn't know 100 years ago? We know that at a subatomic level, everything is really just energy particles. We are all just energy. So science believes there was a big bang. They don't know of what and they don't know why, but a big bang, and everything that we see in the universe, including, all the life forms we see, came out of that big bang. They also understand electromagnetism came out of the big bang. They don't know why. But there's nothing that electromagnetism does that's not purposeful. And so, you know, science believes there's this big bang and there's electrical particles. Somehow they fuse to form elements, and randomly those elements got together to form a living molecule, and randomly those living molecules got together to form the first living cell. And then over billions of years, we have what we have today with all the various life forms. And when you look at a cell, um, so the sperm fertilizes the ovum, and you get the growth of over 9 months, you get the growth of this intricate body. And these cells in us, what we know in science today is that every cell in the body has the library of information for the entire body. The only difference between a liver cell and a skin cell is the work that it does. And these cells in our body work in a harmonious fashion with each other to build and maintain whatever organ or whatever thing that they're doing. So when they're building a liver and maintaining that liver, they suddenly spring into making an ear or a nose. And there's more harmony in our bodies and in our cells than we exhibit as humans. And so our attention, really, the first one cell deserves our attention. So let's look at one cell and discuss that for a moment. So when you look at a cell, it has this permeable membrane over it. And the question is, when did consciousness first seep into or creep into living matter? And is there consciousness in a cell? So let's look at a cell. It's got this permeable membrane over it. It discerns what nutrition is going to be good for it and healthy for it. So it accepts the right nutrition for that permeable membrane. And after it uses it and it builds up toxic waste, it discerns that toxic waste is going to be um, unhealthy for it. And so it gets rid of it through that permeable membrane. That is the first act of consciousness. It is purposeful, and it is this process of and identification. And so if there's consciousness in a cell, then the next question is, well, if there's consciousness in a cell, then why wouldn't there be consciousness in living molecules? And if there's consciousness in living molecules, why wouldn't there be consciousness in the elements that form to create the living molecule? And if there's consciousness in the living molecules, why wouldn't there be consciousness in the elements that combined to form a living molecule? And if in the elements, why not in the electrical particles that fuse to form elements? And so when you look at that, there's some logic in stepping all the way back. Now, science may argue with some of that, and that's totally fine. But when you can actually understand what was before the Big Bang, so this document will describe exactly what was before the Big Bang, the impetus for the Big Bang, what happened at the time of the Big Bang, and what happened with creation, and why electromagnetism came into being. And electromagnetism deserves our attention. It is we are not matter imbued with consciousness. We are consciousness made visible through the descent of vibrational frequency of electrical particles. The only difference between a rock and a loaf of bread is the number of electrical particles, the density of electrical particles, and the rate at which they vibrate. If you can change the number of electrical particles or the density of those electrical particles and change the rate at which they vibrate, inject it with a new consciousness, and you can have a loaf of bread. And so,
wow.
Go ahead.
I say that's really interesting. That's an interesting perspective. We talk about consciousness all the time, and I meditate. And when I was taught meditation, you're supposed to reach a certain level of consciousness. But what you describe is a different perspective on consciousness. Does it all still intertwine past that? Does it go? We all have an individual consciousness, as you just described, the way everything kind of worked together between the cells. And I've never thought about it that way, but how everything works together. I'm assuming, well, with my disease, for example, my rheumatoid arthritis, that can consciousness stop that? Can we manipulate consciousness the way that you're talking about so that we can maybe prevent that from moving forward?
So let's talk about our thinking. Let's talk about, so everything is consciousness. Everything that you see as solid is consciousness made visible. So there's nothing like, you see a hand, and we know in science today that there's more space in this hand than there is solid matter. Same with a rock. You could pick up a rock. There's more space in that, a subatomic level. There's more space in that rock than there is anything that's solid. We are all here in, so your soul is a fragment of divine consciousness, and it is here on a journey. And you will be reincarnated or incarnated many times over many lifetimes, because you're here in this school we call Earth for your soul to learn the lessons it needs to learn on its journey to find its way back to reunion with divine consciousness.
I believe that wholeheartedly.
And so you'll come into lifetime after lifetime after lifetime in varying gender or skin and varying places of origin.
Right.
Sometimes wealthy, sometimes poor, sometimes highly educated, sometimes not educated at all. All of these are designed for your soul to learn the lessons it needs to learn until one day it wakes up to understand the mechanisms of how it is creating every experience in its life.
Do you
And
think
when
that
you understand these,
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
when you understand these mechanisms and you understand how all of this works, then you can make a conscious decision to start to go through this process I describe in my book, In a Higher Road, to cleanse your consciousness of all the things that bring negativity and are actually in contravention with where you come from. You come from unconditional love, you return to unconditional love. It is the mechanics and mechanisms of the ego. The ego is the tool of creation to create individuality out of the wholeness of divine consciousness. And you have come here to learn the lessons you need to learn. It is only through lessons of suffering does the journeying soul gain self-knowledge to retain individuality after discarding the ego. And so you have to take your framework off one lifetime, your frame of reference off one lifetime, and you look at it more as a perspective of a journey of a soul. So this may be the lifetime for you to start that process of understanding and then starting to change how you think and feel. I'm going to answer your question. Mm-hmm. But, or it may have been in a past life when you started that. When you come into this life, you're already at a higher vibrational frequency, and you kind of carry on with that process when you're in this life. I don't know where you are. I don't know where I am. I just know that there's this journey. And in short, the answer to your question is yes, but the mechanisms are described in this process that I followed that enable you to understand that your thinking is an electrical impulse. Your thinking in your brain is an electrical impulse. Your feeling is a magnetic. These are the forms of electromagnetism. So you think with an electrical impulse in your brain, you feel with magnetic impulse in your nervous system. Your thinking is a consciousness plan. What you think about is a consciousness plan. You magnetize it with your thinking, being a feeling of love or feeling of hate. And you create these blueprints, and we do this thousands of them a day. And you magnetize them over repeated thinking and feeling. You magnetize them to draw these experiences into your life. So you will draw illness into your life to create these forms of suffering for yourself until you wake up and understand what you're doing. And when you do this, you can start to go through that process to cleanse yourself of all of those things that bring these negative things into your life, all these things that are contrary to unconditional love. And when you understand this process and you do this, you start to cleanse yourself of all of those things. You start to see and understand your connection with the divine. You will make a connection with the divine by following this process and doing the meditation that's described. And eventually, so at the 7-month mark, I started to feel this little tingling at the top of my head. It was about the size of a dime. I didn't know what it was. It expanded over time. And what it was I was actually growing new brain cells impressed with new knowledge that operated at a higher frequency. And as that grew, what happened is then the spiritual energy started to flow into my head. And then eventually it would go into various parts of my body. It might go down one side, up the other side.
Oh.
And right now you could put a bowl over my head that goes down to the bottom of my ears, and that opening is the entire top of my head. And when you go through this process, and it takes dedication and it takes faith. And when you go through this process, you're building faith in what you know and understand. And when you get this connection with the divine and you feel this inflow of energy, you will know that what you know is true. And when you know this and you carry on with this process, you continually go through this process of inner cleansing and rebuilding of your consciousness to be um, in attunement with the golden aspirations of divine consciousness, and you become connected with it. And it is our creator, and it is unconditional love. God is only unconditional. You're not here to please God. We are here to express God. And your expression of God is unconditional love. And the more that you feel this, you will just want to share this with people. And you will want to express unconditional love. When I see a person today, I don't see them, I see them as a soul that is perfect, that is equal to my soul. It is unconditional love. And anything that they're doing externally, it is just merely their ego. It is their journey that is doing the things that they're doing, that is their path to find their way back to the light. And you might not agree with what they're doing. You might think it is reprehensible what they're doing. And whatever you're thinking and feeling is, that's okay about that. I'd never judge them for what they're doing now, because I know it's just their journey. And what I try and do is just express unconditional love to them. I might not want to engage with them a lot. I might not want to sit down and have them as a friend, because I want to always express unconditional love to them. And I want to hold them in a place in my mind which, expresses that unconditional love and helps them on their journey to wake up and then start this process to cleanse themselves of all of these behaviors that they have. And I may have done all kinds of reprehensible things in a past life. I don't know, but it is just part of this evolutionary process for the soul.
Yeah, it's. I believe in reincarnation. I believe in the fact that we spend multiple lives on this earth to learn. I have complete faith in that, and that we collectively, share that. My wife and I, we believe that we have met before in past lives, and we met again in this life. And same thing with our kids. My wife and my oldest daughter joke around that in another life they were sisters, and in actuality, they act like sisters here, which is kind of unique.
Yes.
I really appreciate what you had said about the fact that how we create for ourselves, for every experience that we have, that we attract that. I think that's the way I caught that when I wrote a note down. We kind of attract that. We create our everything we bring to us. We create, and that includes everything: the health, happiness, joy, prosperity, whatever it happens to be. We have the ability to create that ourselves. Correct?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And well, not only the ability to do it, we do it. We do it unknowingly, we do it unwittingly, we do it ignorantly because we don't understand these mechanisms. And in a higher road, I share as a concrete example for people something that I created back in 2011. I manifested this $60,000 hardtop convertible Lexus. I did it unknowingly, ignorantly, had no idea that's what I was doing.
Yeah, that's a good thing to manifest.
I was just, it was, but I did something every day that I describe in A Higher Road that over the course of a year manifested this for me. I didn't know it was coming. I didn't even know it was $100 lottery ticket. I didn't even know this car was in that lottery. And it manifested in my life. Later in the book, I describe exactly the mechanisms that we use with this new knowledge of spirituality that I have. And this new knowledge of how and why the universe was created and how we use these mechanisms to manifest everything in our life. And
And-
so I use that as a concrete example, one, that how I actually did it, or how I did it, and then two is the actual mechanics of what we do that creates these experiences or events that come into our life.
And you created
And
this
we do
process.
this with everything.
We have a delay. I'm
Sorry.
sorry. I've cut on you twice. I'm sorry. You're talking in British
Oh,
Columbia, and I'm talking from Phoenix, and there was a slight delay there, so my apologies.
no, no worry. It's via Japan, by the way, but just,
Via Japan. That's what I'm hearing, the extra chatter in my earpiece. The your process is a 7-step process, correct?
Correct.
How long does something like that take? Is it individual? I mean, do you set a time limit on each one of these steps, or is it something that this step happens if you follow this process? This step happens when it's supposed to happen.
So there's no time limit on it, and it's individual for people. This is a process where life is a journey within. It is not, we're driven by our externalities, and we're driven by all of the things that we see. In reality, what we see and what we believe, or what we see, is really just a reflection of our beliefs. It's a mirror of what we believe. When you change what you believe, you change what you see, even though nothing in your external environment may be different. And so this is a process that when you go through it, it's very specific about the things that you need to cleanse. And it's very specific about the new knowledge you gain will help you understand these golden qualities of divine consciousness that you would like to aspire to become your consciousness. And when you go through this process, it's a bit of a rinse and repeat process that you're going to go through. But when you follow these steps and you do what I've outlined in this book, I believe you can totally transform your life, no matter whether you're living on the street or you're in a mansion, whether you're ill, whether you're healthy, whether you're happy, whether you're depressed. You can totally bring yourself into alignment with our creator, with the divine. And when you do that and you have this connection with the divine, your life changes. It is totally, for lack of a better word, it is magical. It truly is.
I think we all need a little magic in our lives at some point or another to help us to move forward in a positive way, and to do it in a way that allows us to be more happy and express more joy and love. World needs a lot more love than it has now. Let's
Yeah,
talk about
absolutely.
let's talk a bit about how to get your book and how to find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is dneilelliott.com. Now the D is just the official first initial of my name to differentiate me as an author, and on the internet I go by Neil. But the website is dneilelliott.com. The book is called A Higher Road: Cleanse Your Consciousness to Transcend the Ego and Ascend Spiritually. And I offer a 7-step process to inner peace, joy, love, abundance, and prosperity. It's available on Amazon in hardcover or paperback or ebook, and it's available through your local bookstores. And it's in all the favorite ebook forms of Kindle, Apple, Nook, Kobo, and it's available globally.
And I'll make sure that all that is in the show notes too. So then on the webpage we have on beforeyouGoPodcast.com, there'll be links there for our listeners and our viewers as well. So they have an easy way to find your book and to connect with you personally. You give some personal follow-up to some of these processes.
If people ask me questions, absolutely. As they're going through it, and if they have any questions, then I ask, please reach out, and you can get that information, that contact information, on the website.
That's brilliant. It's an amazing journey that you've come from as far back as you have come from, especially coming from on the verge of suicide to sharing love, joy, and prosperity, happiness, and abundance. Now it's a huge step, as we talked about before the conversation. Um, I have dealt with the negative and the dark road too many times and saw too many people not come out of it. And you have overcome it and climbed a mountain and stand atop the mountain with something that is an opportunity for people to move forward in a very positive way. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, and again, and it's a pleasure to be here and having this conversation with you. And my goal is to help change the consciousness of the world, one person at a time. And when you're ready for it and it makes sense to you, then please, please, please do that.
Absolutely. Speaking of changing, this is one more thing before you go. So before we go, do you have any words of wisdom you'd like to share?
I think that the big thing is that you are maintained and supported in unconditional love always, and the thing that blocks you from feeling it and experiencing it is these mechanisms of the ego. And when you learn how how creation was created and how these mechanisms work, you can undo that, and you can connect back with where you truly come from, and with our source. And when that happens, your life changes. And it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're on the street or whether you're in a mansion, or ill or healthy. And you can start to correct when you understand these processes. You can start to slowly correct these health issues that you may be plagued with. And as this near-death experience of this woman that as soon as she actually understood where she came from and where she was returning to, her cancer disappeared within 2 weeks.
That's amazing.
Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen for people that go through this process I'm talking about, but because she is so, what's the word? She just knows at the deepest level who
Intuitive.
she really is. Yeah, she knows at the deepest level who she really is. And this process will get you in touch with that and allow you to experience these same kind of things. And I share some of these meditations I have, which were truly amazing and remarkable in my book as well.
Well, that's profound words of wisdom. Neil, and Neil, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your journey, and it's been a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your journey and your expertise and your wisdom with us.
Well, thank you, Michael. I appreciate being here, and namaste.
Namaste.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go, a unique conversation about life. If you like our show and want to know more, check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. That's beforeyougopodcast.com. Tell your story, share your expertise, contribute to the blog, and subscribe to the newsletter. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.
And one more thing before you go. Have a nice day, have a nice week, and thanks for listening.
One More Thing Before You Go, a unique conversation about life podcast, is a creation of One More Thing Productions, established 2010, all rights reserved.